Colleagues, friends, our dear guests, participants of the first Global Forum of Young Diplomats in Sochi, participants of the 19th World Festival of Youth and Students, welcome to this session of the first Global Forum of Young Diplomats. And our subject today is fake news as a threat to digital diplomacy. Our speaker today is the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova. Also, I'd like to introduce our guests and speakers for this session. Georgy Kaptelin, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of TASS News Agency, and Mansura Adamova, Russian Committee for Solidarity and Cooperation. Ms. Zakharova, please. Thank you. Thank you for your trust, your presence. You even had to change the room because there are so many of you. And today in the afternoon, I see how many interesting events you have here, and still you are here. To me, this is a sign of great trust in me. Thank you very much, really. You know how sometimes artists say at concerts, I don't see your hands. Well, I see your phones. Can you forget about your phones for a second? Raise your hands. Hi everybody. Finally, I see living people, living eyes, living hands. So, guys, whatever, colleagues, we have a very interesting subject today. So, what I'm going to do, I'll try to be very brief. It doesn't really work out usually with me, but I'll do my best to give a brief introduction, and I really want to take as many questions as possible. So I promise that despite what organizers may say here, I'll do my best to take as many questions as I can. Fake news as a threat to digital diplomacy. First, a couple of words on digital diplomacy. What is digital diplomacy? You understand, of course, that this is inalienable part of public diplomacy. This is a modern manifestation of classical public diplomacy, which became possible with the advancement of mass communications and mass media. Digital diplomacy is not just news. More importantly, this is exchanging views, but definitely when we say that, we mean that there should be the official position by the foreign ministry or the government. Anything posted on social media by a government structure should reflect the official position of this country on various issues. So digital diplomacy combines two things. On the one hand, there is the official position. Yet, on the other hand, you invite people to have a discussion. You're being open, but you're not open for the sake of being open. You're open for the sake of having a dialogue with society, with the people living in your country, with people living in other countries. You're stepping over barriers which are actually artificial, and they're supported artificially through a visa regime, other barriers. Sometimes it is actually mass media itself that sets up these barriers, preventing information from flowing from one country to another. This digital diplomacy offers a unique opportunity for us to communicate, despite the fact that we may be living in different countries. This is a platform where the official position meets private views of citizens. Unfortunately, though, we see the trend for development of digital diplomacy, and on the other hand, we see threats that are emerging, and those threats may undermine the trust that global public has for the institution of digital diplomacy. You know what this problem is. This is propaganda, manipulating public opinion through both open and sometimes hidden circulation of false information, so-called fake news. Those who use such methods are doing so for obvious reasons. They pursue their own hidden agenda, both inside their countries and abroad. They are seeking to achieve their geopolitical goals, whatever means they might use. Unfortunately, fake news are a global trend today. When they circulate information about our country, about Russia, many mainstream media use the same technique. Quite often, they don't use specific facts. Instead, they use such a scheme. Personally, I call this scheme, and we face it daily, I call it an information carousel. What does this mean? First, there is a source. They don't give you a specific name or a specific position, specific title. They just quote an anonymous source in some country. They provide information to media, something about Russia. And we see a lot of reports like that, reports that distort the truth about what Russia actually does, say in Syria, or those reports about Russian hackers, or those leaks from the US government, from government agencies in the United States. These distorted reports are then published in the media, and later journalists use those leaks to publish articles. They don't have any specific facts. It's not substantiated in any way. And then they bring this information back to government structure as questions, and then government agencies who actually started the circulation of this false information, they kind of legalize this information by answering those questions and talking about their concerns based on what they read in the media. So first there is a leak that goes to the media. They leak fake news to the media, and then they respond to media, quoting media reports as the source of this information. Let me give you a specific example. Just a few years, for a number of years, the Russian Federation has been helping with resolving the situation in Syria. And every time, say, we meet with our Western partners, they always say that it is not terrorists that Russia is fighting in Syria. They say Russians are killing civilians in Syria. So we would ask our Western partners, could you give us at least one fact? Can you give us any evidence? And they would say, it's all available on social media. It's all in the media, they say. And when you go to the media, what you see there is actually leaks, unsubstantiated facts. As we all understand, it was actually the West who planted those false reports in the media. I'd like to tell you that for a number of years, we have had Russian journalists working in Syria, and they work there courageously. There are reporters from Russia TV channel, Rossiya TV channels, from Russia Today. They report being there on the ground. They present truth concerning the situation there. But for some reason, other countries who accuse Russia of pursuing wrong policies in Syria, their journalists are not there. They get information through those government agencies circulating fake news, unfortunately. So, of course, schemes like that, those dirty schemes, cause a lot of damage to trust. for digital diplomacy and mass media in general. Let me give you another example. It's not as global as my example with Syria, with what Russia does in Syria. Here's another example, and it's comical. They say that in Sweden there are Russian submarines that surface all the time. I don't know if we have anybody from Sweden here. If we have a person in Sweden, I would like to see such a person. If no, let me tell you about this myself. Regularly, over the past few years, we have been hearing reports in mainstream media and on major websites. There are reports claiming that there are some unidentified objects surfacing, and they were seen by local experts, local military officers, and usually they say they've been identified as Russian submarines. However, there is no evidence, there is no official report to substantiate this claim. I don't know, you may say, you may have radio intercepts or whatever. I'm not even talking about photographs or videos. Of course, there are no photographs, no videos. And then the Russian Defense Ministry and the Russian Foreign Ministry would issue, or the Russian Embassy in Sweden would issue a statement saying this was totally false, and they never quote us. I thought this was new know-how, new technology that they started using only in the last 2 years. We looked at official press releases, official statements from 15 years ago, and we found out that regularly they were questions about, it was Soviet submarines back then. People were asking what are they doing off Sweden's coast. The people come and go, but those fakes, they have been there for years and years and years. So once again, regarding those reports about Russian submarines, we have never received any official inquiry from Sweden based on which we would be able to present our official position or somehow explain the situation. But it's always unnamed, anonymous sources, and all those reports are being circulated. Why do they do this? Because they want to impress people with the feeling of threat, that Russia presents some kind of threat. All we want to do with Sweden is have normal, constructive relationship. We want to build trust. We want to cooperate. We want to meet at forums like this one for young people, forums for adults, forums where people come together to address global problems. We have never had any intention to threaten anybody. We don't need that. And yet, here is a specific example. You can go online, you'll see a lot of reports about Russian submarines supposedly surfacing off Sweden's coast. Let me give you another example. I just want to give some specific examples to you. In August of 2014, Mr. Turchinov, the parliamentary speaker of Ukraine, said 1,500 tons of Russian humanitarian aid to southeastern Ukraine, medications, baby food, and other cargo, that this was a provocation. This was not humanitarian cargo. Let me give you a quote, literally. This is what he said, that this humanitarian convoys are used specifically to deliver weapons to separatists. Well, of course, nobody believes what Mr. Turchinov has to say, but let's look at leading Western media. What do they say about Russian humanitarian convoys delivering humanitarian aid to Donbass? Remember when we had the first Russian convoy, those white trucks going to eastern Ukraine, going to Donetsk and Lugansk, where people were really waiting for this humanitarian aid. What did the Western media report? What did U.S. television show? They said, this is Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And they kept saying this around the clock. And even though the Russian Foreign Ministry denounced those reports Even though we were more than willing to show this cargo, we wanted everybody to see what kind of humanitarian cargo we delivered to Eastern Ukraine. Still, those mainstream media and the social media, they kept saying that it is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This was a lie. We have dozens. Believe me. Well, don't believe me. You can check this. Check this out for yourself. There are dozens of convoys with tens of thousands of tons of humanitarian aid, generators, textbooks, clothes, food, everything people need to survive. All those convoys have been sent to Ukraine, but nobody talks about this on in Western media. They never apologized for circulating lies about those humanitarian convoys. Let me give you another example. Syria. Syrian settlement. I already mentioned that briefly, but this is just some kind of show, the way they present what Russian Air Force does in Syria. Here's an example. Just before the United States had this election that I'm sure will be remembered for a very long time, this 2016 election, when Mr. Lavrov was about to give a press conference, there was a leading analyst and political scientist from CNN that asked to be there, and one of the key subjects, of course, during this interview, this was Syria. And the interview was wonderful. All those questions, they didn't send it to us in advance. This was real, a natural dialogue. And then, unfortunately, we see that the correspondent was not even trying to pretend to be objective. All those questions was biased, but that's okay. The Russian minister presented his position, and then at the very end, do you know what happened? Do you remember what happened at the very end of this interview? Do you remember? No, it was actually worse than that. It was worse. As the finale of this interview, she pulled out the picture of the Syrian boy. Do you remember that? And then they show it on the screen. They blowed up this picture of a Syrian boy as an example of brutality by a Russian Air Force in Syria. This is the result of Russian airstrikes. And you, Russia, you are responsible for that. So what do you have to say for yourself? Then a few months later, it turned out that this Syrian boy is very much alive. And actually, what his father says is that this family has been suffering for years from terrorists operating in Syria, and that this family, their father, he supports the government. He thinks the government is fighting terrorists. So this is obviously, they're manipulating facts. They're using this kid to create this impression of Russia being aggressive. Why do they need all that? They need all that in order to tell the US audience and make people make the right choice during the election. And this is what they have been talking about at the State Department, at the Defense Department, claiming that Russia was the aggressor there. Do you know how many letters we wrote to CNN and to their office in the Russian Federation asking them to report that this boy is alive, that he was not killed by Russian aggressors, that they're suffering from terrorists, and the wounds that he sustained did not come as a result of an airstrike. This is a proven fact. And the father is there. The father is ready to give an interview to CNN. Do you think anybody was interested? Do you think CNN was interested in going there and interviewing this boy's father, in talking to this boy, talking to this family? Do you think this correspondent, and this is a very well-known correspondent, do you think she apologized for what happened during this interview? Never. This never happened. This is a very good example of fake news, of misinformation. But they circulated this misinformation before a very important event in the United States in order to influence the election, influence the course of the campaign during the race. And then they accuse Russia of influencing the campaign. Don't talk about Russia. Look at what your own media did. Look at what the US media did. They zombify people. They manipulate people. I'm not saying that our media are perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. But when you make a mistake, you have to apologize. You have to take responsibility. Because mass media deceive people and manipulate them. Remember aggression in Iraq. Remember what happened there. It was over 10 years ago. Many of you were children back then. You may not remember this, but read about that. This is really an example of using fake news, fake images to influence the course of history in this entire region. I'm not even talking about one country. I'm not even talking about hundreds of thousands of civilians who were not just wounded, they were killed. Nobody even counted them. They don't even count them.
И многое, с чем сейчас приходится сталкиваться в регионе, и в Сирии, и в Ливии, и во многих других странах региона. Вот эти все кризисы во многом уходят корнями в ту агрессию, которая была совершена в отношении суверенного государства под предлогом обмана, манипуляции общественным мнением. Вспомните эту...
Remember what happened in the UN Security Council when Colin Powell brought those things saying that they found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I remember very well everything that Russia said, China said at the time, saying that that it would be a mistake. It would actually result in a disaster for this country, and this would have extremely negative consequences for the region and the world as a whole. And because of the responsible position of a number of countries, we were able to prevent the UN Security Council from adopting a resolution that would justify this aggression. But despite that, they bypassed the opinion of the global community expressed in rejection of this adoption. Still, this aggression took place. And I repeat, they never apologized. Oh, forget about apologies. They even did not count the number of victims among civilians. Those Iraqi children who were not just wounded, they were killed. They could have been as old as you. They could have been here at this wonderful festival or other festivals. They also could be professionals, but they are no longer. They didn't get this chance. And what is happening with Syrian kids today? You know, we have lots of delegations coming from Syria. Groups of Syrian kids, we invite them here for treatment. We send them to summer camps in Russia. I meet with those kids regularly. They're alive, they're well. But you see this pain in their eyes, and they ask you why. Why did this happen to us? Many of those kids had their parents killed. Their fathers were killed. Members of their families were killed. So they ask why. In what way are we inferior to other kids? Those living in Europe, those living in the United States, they're not inferior. They're just victims of fake news, fake misinformation campaigns. It's not their fault. And again, you have this whole generation of Syrian children and Libyan children. And they have to suffer because you can't forget what is happening in the region. And now, the international community, all those people who spoke about Libya so much. Now they spend a lot of money. They spend taxpayer dollars to convene conferences on rebuilding Libya. Well, how about that time when you made this decision which destroyed this country? But once again, I would like to say it's very, very important for you to understand and remember something. When you destroy a nation, you destroy the entire system of international relations in the region. And now you have all those migrants, initially they called them migrants, but now they're refugees. These are actually refugees who fled to Europe. And only after all those refugees came to prosperous Europe, only then Europeans started to think about the consequences of their policies. And prior to that, they didn't care about that.
White helmets and is another example of the myth circulated through mass media, through social media. So apparently this is an NGO conducting humanitarian activities. Well, look at their funding. Look who's behind that. These people, this organization, they got an Oscar. A humanitarian organization got an Oscar for a movie. This is happening today, in front of our eyes. In front of the eyes of people, each of whom has a cell phone, a device that allows you to access the internet, listen to radio, and they're trying to fool us. Maybe in less than a year, we don't need decades to pass these days, like it happened with Iraq. 10 years passed before we saw the truth resurfacing, but now time is running so fast, it's not going to take 10 years. A year or two is all it will take for us to learn the truth about white helmets and other pseudo-humanitarian organizations and so-called moderate terrorists. They're not moderate at all, they're real terrorists, and they're trying to seize this Middle East and North Africa, and not only that, also European countries as well. The truth is, we are under a threat. The misinformation is threatening us, is a threat to us. Maybe this is not such good wording, but this is a threat to us. Misinformation is a threat because it influences how the decisions are made these days. So the virtual world is threatening the real world. What else? In the context of threats to digital diplomacy. This is a paradox. I never thought we would witness this, but there are fake accounts of government bodies created these days. There is a whole network of accounts supposedly belonging to our embassies, consulates, representatives to international organizations. Fake accounts started multiplying, and they circulated fake information. So we learned that there is no tool for us to close those accounts, to block them. We had to call the social media headquarters, they had to look at our applications, etc. And those accounts are spewing poison into the information sphere. We've been dealing with that over the last few months. And when it came to those fake accounts, for some of them, we found out where the funding came from. We found the people who are running them. So what do you think? It's not just some individuals. There are certain structures and bodies behind them. So these examples that I've given you now, those are the challenges and threats, not only to digital diplomacy, but to all of us. We've been doing a lot to try to counteract these poisonous fakes. We hold briefings, we meet with the public, we circulate information on social media, and we made a tab on the Foreign Ministry official website giving examples of publications that publish fake information about Russia. We have screenshots and links to these fake news, and we provide arguments why they're fake. Please take a look, visit our website. And here's the last example. It's a tragic example, really. I'm talking about referendum in Catalonia. There have been attempts to accuse Russia of intervening in domestic affairs there. Today in the audience we have Russians and people from other countries, so I'm telling you this. Our position on the then upcoming referendum in Catalonia, Russian Foreign Ministry announced it long before it was held. There are no two ways about interpreting it. We've stated on a number of times, we've published statements that we support the Spanish Constitution, and our position was very clear. We've reiterated it before, during, after the referendum. But imagine that. There have been some sources and links to sources, and even heads of foreign ministries of a number of states, say Mr. Rinkevich, who said that we need to investigate what role Russia played in this referendum because there are some suspicions. Well, what kind of suspicions? We've stated our clear position that we supported territorial integrity of Spain. This is an official, clear position. That's an example for you. I've talked to some of you, a lot of you here in these rooms, in the corridors, and some foreigners told me, why aren't you talking about this? Or why aren't you talking about that? Why? Like, for example, this young man came up to me, he's from Bulgaria. He asked me why you are not heard in the Balkans, because there's anti-Russian sentiment on the rise there. But no, we are talking about this. In this context, about Balkans and other international issues, this information is blocked, unfortunately. You're not getting it. So we are going to work harder to improve the situation. I'll be willing to take your questions later. Thank you, Ms. Zakharova. I'd like to give the floor to Georgi Kaptelin. Thank you very much. Colleagues, welcome. It's nice to see all the people interested in this topic. Ms. Zakharova spoke from the Foreign Ministry point of view, and I'm going to tell you what I think from my experience and maybe the reasons for why fake news appear. Ms. Zakharova spoke about Iraq. I worked there in 2004, 2005. I was a reporter. So from my personal experience, I'll tell you this. Our Western colleagues stayed in the hotels, secure hotels, and never went anywhere. In best case scenario, they sent locals. So sometimes they would put bulletproof vests and try to have live reports from there. It was a different type of work. Well, there have always been lies, and the reasons could be different. But at the golden age of journalism in the 60s, 70s, journalists had their own laws. They had this understanding the notion of reputation. We don't really have that anymore. They had a different approach to gathering information, looking for it. They really conducted investigations like law enforcement. They went to see people, to ask them questions. It was hard work. In my personal opinion, what happened, it was digital devaluation, is how I call it, devaluation. So technology has advanced rapidly. We've changed as well. The media landscape has changed. Again, from my personal experience, when I came to Channel 1, to the leading news program, they had 4 sources of information. 2 faxes. You know, it wasn't even a computer. Telephones that you could use to call, to interview people. There were newspapers, you know, what we had instead of Wikipedia back then. There were no fakes there. And there were older colleagues, and from their experience they could basically feel the atmosphere, and every 2-3 hours we had to go on air and prepare our stories. Nowadays, anyone who has a computer, who has access to the internet, could be a journalist. So there's been dramatic changes. So why do I say devaluation? If you have a camera, you can make hundreds of pictures, and 2 and 3 of them would be good. You can even make a video, a movie, using your cell phone. I'm not talking about quality, but you could do that. So we are all journalists a little bit, in a way. Maybe it's a provocation on my part, but there is a difference between journalists and reporters from social media bloggers. It's professionalism and responsibility. When there is no responsibility and professionalism, we have fake news. As Ms. Zakharova said, well, stop quoting great people. Well, I'm a journalist, I have to quote, I have to cite you, because otherwise it would be a fake. Well, I'm not going to give you examples, really, but everyone is seeing some kind of Pokemon monsters that help elect presidents. I have this issue with the Kaspersky Lab. This is unverified opinion, but for some reason they believe that Kaspersky Lab stole information from Pentagon and White House. So the Kaspersky Lab's business is being threatened, but fakes are prospering. There are commercial fakes. So if you circulate information about a company that their positions in the stock market are falling, they could lose a lot of money. Why is this being done? Well, it's easier if you make an enemy out of your competitor, kind of dematerialize them. It's easier to defeat them then. Remember Yugoslavia, 1999? It doesn't exist anymore. There's been so much written about Serbians, like they were drinking baby blood or something. And you see, no one's writing anything about them anymore. There's nothing bad happening, and there is no reason for them to write about something good. So, fakes are, unfortunately, a tool to manipulate public opinion, a geopolitical tool even. Currently, could we fight this somehow? Hopefully, probably, maybe big data is going to help us. new technology or blockchains, when every participant, when every source of information is known, maybe this will help. But time will tell. Otherwise, in this situation when North Korea is threatening to demolish their neighbors, every new conflict might seem worse than the previous one, maybe even critical for life on our planet. Let's try to fight this and eradicate this.
I'd like to add a few words about Pokemon. You may have not heard this news, but US media, again quoting some obscure sources, they circulated this story that Russia supposedly tried to influence the US presidential election through Afro-Americans by modeling computer games with Pokemon. And it's not like they are trying to hurt us. This is not just another fake. It's not just about us. You really have to hate your own people. This is humiliating. You really have to look down on Afro-Americans in your own country to claim that people make their political choice based on computer games, video games. And again, this is not just about us accusing Russia. This is crazy. I'm not even talking about that. This is a real problem. They're being so snobbish. Just one category of people, one group of media in the United States, they're being so snobbish. They're looking down on part of their population. They claim that Russia used to take advantage of race and used Pokemon games to influence African Americans. Are these not proper people? In 21st century, they need Pokemon to tell them whom to vote for? That's not even funny. This is humiliating for a great number of people. So, I think this is terrible. For this reason, because it's humiliating. This is truly humiliating, at least I think so. Thank you very much, Georgi. I would now ask Mansour Adamov to say a few words. Good afternoon, friends. Friends, because I believe this is the motto of our festival. This is the third time that Russia hosts this festival. Before it was the Soviet Union, of course. So the Russian Committee for Solidarity and Cooperation, this is the third time we send our delegates to this international festival. We have been working for 60 years to build friendship, cooperation, and mutual understanding. The subject we discuss here today, fake news. This is really what we see happening today. And young people are the vanguard in journalism, in politics, in public relations. We should always watch closely things that are happening today. And like we just said, journalists have become less responsible about what they write, what they say. So I suggest we join our forces together. We should use this international festival as an opportunity to come together, become friends, and highlight these news. We should address the situation in each and every of our countries. We should do our best to turn this around. We, as the public, we should do our best to cooperate and find a way to present accurate information about what is happening around the world, especially with the young people. Thank you for coming here, for being here. I don't want to take too much time from other speakers. So basically, I just want to say let's spend more time talking to each other on the public level and the diplomatic level. Thank you. Thank you, Mansour. Friends, we'll now have a Q&A session. And first, I know you have a lot of questions for our speakers today, so please raise your hands as high as you can. We'll start with the third row.
From the United States. I'm an American. And I first want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the way that international reporters like myself have been welcomed to this historic international gathering to do our jobs as journalists. And in the spirit of the struggle for journalistic integrity that you just articulated, I would just like to ask you two questions. The first is, what is behind this effort by the leaders of the United States, this pressure that's being placed on myself and my colleagues at RT? What is the end game? What is the motivation for their efforts against RT? And secondly, I wanted to ask, in the context of in the context of all this deception, you talked about Pokemon and such, what is it that you would like average Americans to know about Russia? What is it, if you could speak to average Americans, everyday working class people in the United States and tell them something about Russia that they need to know that they're not hearing in the media, what would it be? Thank you.
On your first question, why there is this pressure on Russia today in the United States? I think the answer is obvious. There is no reason to analyze. It's all very simple. Actually, it may not be that simple, but the answer is obvious anyways, to me. More than 10 years ago, the RT channel was established, and back then, nobody took it seriously. Our Western partners did not take it seriously. Why? They were all relaxed. They all said, oh, this channel is set up with government funds, and this is propaganda, 100%. It will never work. Why? Why did they say that? Because a propaganda channel, if it's a pure propaganda, they have no future, because people see through it straight away. Nobody is going to watch pure propaganda. Nobody cares for propaganda. In a year or two, propaganda media die. Nobody cares about them because you have lots of alternative sources of information and you can always verify reports. So everybody said that this is just another propaganda outlet. They set it up and then it will die very soon. And there are similar examples. English-speaking channels in a number of countries, they only survived for a year or two. And then they disappeared. Not because they ran out of money, because people did not watch them. And with Russia today, it was quite the opposite. Yes, the money did come from the government, and it still comes from the government. But this channel, what it does is they present an unbiased view. They present platform to people from all sorts of, from the entire spectrum, with all sorts of views. And people working at this channel, they come from all sorts of countries, from different countries. Do you think people working at Russia today are these special graduates from some special schools who were taught to do Kremlin propaganda? You're from the US, right? Do you have the U.S. passport? Are you a U.S. citizen? Okay, here. So these people working at RT, they come from different countries. I recently attended an anniversary of RT Arabic. They don't have Russian people there at all, basically. There are guys from Egypt, Syria, Palestinians, and many other Middle East countries. So, do you think those people, though they've been planted as Russian spies since they were little kids? No, they're Syrians, they're Egyptians, people from many Arab countries in the region, and they came themselves because they wanted to work for RT Arabic. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, people began to realize that this channel actually works, that it's media. It's not just propaganda. Of course, they may be wrong sometimes, they may be biased sometimes, but this is an actual media organization where people from all over the world work. And then all of a sudden, everybody realized that now there is this alternative point of view available on the international arena. And those fat cats, those mainstream media, they have now a competitor, this international media organization that offers real competition. So what do? And they panicked. They really panicked. They launched an information campaign against Russia Today. Just look at all those articles in English, French, German, published against this channel. Is there another TV channel in the world that would have so much negative propaganda about it? No, it's only Russia Today. And what happened as a result? It backfired on them. They were unable to stop this channel. They were unable to convince people not to watch it. On the contrary, the channel got even more viewers because you can't cheat people, you can't deceive them. People can always look for themselves, they can see for themselves. They see that reports by this channel are true, or at least they are partially confirmed that this is a real media organization. So this made them think even harder. People who did not like this channel, what do now? And they took the next step. They launched aggressive policies against correspondents working for this channel. They refused to give them accreditation or did not let them to attend certain events or arrest them at a rally. You know, when they had the inauguration ceremony in the United States, I think it was your correspondent who was arrested. He was not involved in any rallies, any protests. He was just there doing his job as a reporter, and he got detained. He got picked off the street. But this did not work. Correspondents continued doing their job. This channel continued broadcasting, and then I think they made a decision. And I think intelligence services were involved. They made a decision on how they can neutralize this channel, and then they launched the next stage of this campaign. They said that in the US, they have to enforce the Foreign Agent Registration Act. It's perfectly legal. They fulfill all the requirements, but there's just one but. Other media are foreign channels like Deutsche Welle or the BBC. They're not forced to register as foreign agents. Their correspondents are not arrested and they're not accused of violating the United States law. But with Russia Today, they say they want to enforce this Foreign Agents Registration Act. And this is, they do this on purpose. This is their policy. They want to destroy this channel. They want to tear it down in the United States. So we said, for the first time in many years, in decades actually, we said, this time, we will go tit for tat. We'll do the same with the U.S. media in Russia. We've never used what the Russian law allows us to do on the rules for accrediting foreign media, even when they had information campaigns against us. And, you know, we are in Sochi. You people in Sochi, you remember very well what they wrote about the Olympic Games. what U.S. journalists wrote about the Olympic Games that was hugely successful here in Sochi, in this fantastic city, and they saw it with their own eyes. And you know how many letters we received from Russian people saying, you should actually kick all those U.S. journalists out of Russia. We live in Sochi. Why do they write all those terrible reports? However, we've never taken this kind of administrative measures against U.S. journalists. But we said, if they do this with Russia today, unless they stop this, we will apply the Russian law. We'll use mirror measures. We'll do the same. And what was your second question? Oh, what I would tell to an average American. Okay, yeah, I remember. Now, well, first of all, for me to say something to an average American, I don't have to use Russia Today, or I don't have to use the platform here. I used to live in the U.S. I spent a number of years there. I really love American people. Why? Because they're just the same. They're just like us. They have their advantages, the disadvantages, good points, bad points. The only thing I would like to tell them, you should come here. You should take a look for yourself. We have excellent places here, and you saw this in Sochi. We may be good at something, not so good at other things, but we are learning, we're building our country. You should come and see for yourself. Don't believe the mainstream media. We are open. We are very hospitable. We want people to come here, and we are more than willing to show you everything. We want the American people to learn more about our country. Of course, it's weird talking about this in the 21st century. It's not even the beginning of the 21st century. It's not even the first decade of the 21st century, but there's not much we can do. They're being zombified by mass media. You know, we used to have this song, we don't want to go to war. They always accuse us of being unpredictable. We are totally predictable. We don't want war. We know what war is. And we've been to war a number of times. But those wars, we did not start them. Those wars were wars that other countries started against Russia. And the most terrible war in the 20th century, the World War II, what we call the Great Patriotic War, where we suffered huge losses. Generations of people were not born because people were killed, and we spent decades to rebuild after this war, to get back on track. And this is still in our DNA. We remember this war. This pain is still with us. It goes through generations. And now they say, we want war. Are we being aggressive? No. We are totally predictable. We only want peace. We only want cooperation.
Thank you very much. First row here from Cambodia, please.
Introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Sae Hong. I'm from Cambodia. I'm a young diplomat from Cambodia. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all guest speakers for your impressive and knowledgeable speech. Well, the issue of the fake news is a big problem that's threat the digital diplomacy, and it also affects the international relation and cooperation between the countries. In this regard, I think the solutions should be taken into account by all countries and international community. And my question to you is, what would be the future's form of international system or cooperations that can be used as a tool to fight against the fake news issues? Thank you so much. Yeah.
Вы даже не представляете, насколько ваш вопрос.
You probably don't quite know that you hit bullseye of our discussion. I spoke of this exactly in the morning. I was also a speaker at a different panel. I think that maybe you don't quite know this, even if you're a diplomat. This spring, April, May 2017, there's a committee at the UN General Assembly on information. It existed for years and years. Over 100 countries participate in its work. So they deal with international information issues. Russian delegation came there and brings an initiative for this committee to ask the UN Secretariat to create a mechanism to counteract circulation of fake news. So this was the initiative of the Russian delegation. It was discussed beforehand, and the UN Secretariat said that they're drowning in the influx of fake news and that they approve of this initiative very much. Why this Secretariat? Because they have a Department of Public Information. There's a lot of specialists working there. They're working on implementing an information strategy. They launch campaigns, they publish papers, they're doing a lot of work. So the Secretariat and its department, they have a lot of experience when it comes to dealing with information on a global level. They interact with a lot of agencies and mass media outlets. So who else would be better to work on the strategy than the UN, or at least to offer the vision of how to resolve this issue? They have a lot of experience when it comes to signing agreements, conducting negotiations, on fact-checking. Russia initiated this. We got the support from the Secretariat. We understood that a lot of countries would be interested in working on this. So who do you think blocked this initiative? Who didn't give us the chance to introduce this wording into a resolution draft? Our counterparts from the US, the very same delegation from the country whose president says every day that it's very important to fight fake news. So this delegation blocked our initiative that would have the committee ask the Secretariat to create a special mechanism. It's hard to believe, but it means they're afraid of something. They're trying to protect some part of their media landscape. I see no other explanation for this. But, of course, it doesn't mean that we will stop, that we will make no more attempts. I believe that this is a very important goal and task for us, journalist unions, for the government, to come up with these proposals, to come up with ways to counteract fake news, to work out certain mechanisms, to prevent disinformation campaigns. And of course, we will be happy to participate. I'd like to add something. News agency TASS came up with an initiative at the St. Petersburg International Forum this year to counteract fake news. So we are waiting what's going to come out of it. Thank you. Hello, I'm from Greece. Thank you very much for your wonderful speeches. This is an interesting format. Foreign ministry briefings are so official. You spoke about Russia's relations with the Balkans, and you can see delegations from Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria here, which means that most young people in the Balkans are healthy, so to speak. So my question is a little bit more specific. As a masterclass, if you are not a specialist in international relations or in journalism, how can you tell fake news from real news? I spoke about this earlier today. I came up with a technique for that. We understand that this entire sphere is based on trust. You can trust some media outlet or not. Maybe it's not even a media outlet, maybe it's a blogger, maybe it's some kind of influencer. So how do you protect yourself from fake news? And not maybe even fake news, but biased opinions. Well, people are biased, and journalists are often biased. So here's my technique that I'd like to recommend to you and many people who ask the same question. I look at media outlets, TV channels, I listen to political scientists, journalists, I read their articles, and I look at what they write about upcoming events. For example, when Brexit was an upcoming event, 3-4 months before the referendum, I took a look at the media landscape and I saw that this journalist writes this and that, and this media outlet writes this and that. And when Brexit took place, I saw very clearly which analysis held true and which was propaganda. This is how I choose, how I pick journalists and political scientists whose opinion I take into consideration, who I listen to. But you have a brain, a heart, a soul. You are the only person who can determine whom to trust. There is no universal truth. As soon as someone proclaims there is a universal truth, we will have a totalitarian regime. There are different points of view. In the end, it's only you who makes this decision, whom to listen to and whom not to listen to. So this is my strategy. I'm always very curious. I always ask journalists and political scientists about what their opinion is on upcoming events, referendums, on developments of certain situations. And so I have this rating of journalists and publicists whose forecasts always come true. And vice versa, it's always true. So I have a blacklist, so to speak. And on my blacklist, I put the articles or the media outlets whose analysis doesn't hold true, or whose analysis is propaganda. I gave you the example with the CNN journalist. I was there. I saw her do it, take out this picture of the Syrian boy. I saw it with my own eyes, and I know that despite all our inquiries, she didn't apologize, she didn't retract her statement, she decided not to react in any way. So this is very telling. I'd like to add something. There's this news about Norwegian delegation visiting Crimea, it was sort of ignored. There was so much negativity about their visit. They were not journalists, they were just ordinary people who were interested in seeing how things are in Crimea. They wanted to talk to ordinary people. They didn't want any official statements. They went there, they looked around, despite the position of their government. So they went there, they looked at everything with their own eyes, and they started telling other people about it. So this is how we can check and double check information. Better to see for yourself.
Thank you very much. I will have 2 comments and 1 question. I work at the Argentine embassy. I would like to thank Mr. Kolpakov for organizing this forum of young diplomats. And I would like to thank Ms. Zakharova for what she did and her vast experience. And once again, I would like to thank Maria Zakharova for her upcoming visit to the Republic of Argentina. We hope that your visit to our country will be as fruitful as our visit here. A brief comment on the crises you mentioned. For example, the crisis in Syria, the White Helmets, what they do. It's a humanitarian organization. It depends on the foreign ministry. They've been providing humanitarian aid for over 20 years. So we are very grateful to our colleagues from Artis Español because they published an article recently about White Helmets saying that they were Argentinians. I would like to ask about the threats that Maria Zakharova mentioned. What digital diplomacy tools do you develop at your Department of Information and Media? What kind of mechanism you might use? We plan to have a first run of consultations between Russia and Argentina, between our public relations departments, and we will talk about fake news, among other things. Talking about our bilateral relations, how one way is to call each other. We can our 2 ministries can call each other, or media organizations of 2 countries can call each other. You can do this through the embassy. I know that your new ambassador arrived here recently. We had a meeting. As far as digital diplomacy is concerned, of course, everything that's being done, we have developed a portal of the foreign ministry. It's not just a site; it's a portal, and we have, for example, our consulates. They also have their web pages. A lot of materials is available at those websites. We also help our missions abroad to update their websites. We will bring them up to a whole new level now. And of course, we work on social media. We have accounts for the building on Smolenskaya Square. the headquarters of the foreign ministry, and we have a whole network of accounts, a whole system of accounts for Russian embassies, Russian consulates general, Russian missions abroad, and we've been coordinating this work from the headquarters. We comment on things, we respond to questions, we review requests from people and journalists asking us to talk to them. We have special accounts, special pages on social media. For example, for the consular department, they set up their page on social media about a year and a half ago, and it really works because this is a direct channel for communicating with our people who need help immediately. And we also have special apps for people who are abroad in case they have an emergency situation. There is this app, Mobile Helper. We are using it and it really works. It's quite effective. We also have online discussions, online interviews. In addition to all that, we have a combination of traditional methods and digital new techniques. For example, a lot of time we are invited to join different forums, like this huge forum where you have over 25,000 people. With such a forum, of course, we would always come and participate in a few discussions, so we give interviews. But then there are smaller forums, regional forums where 100 people may come together or 200 people may come together. And if it's a remote region of Russia, of course, we are physically unable to visit all those events. For example, it may take you 7.5 hours to spend 90 minutes there, and then you have to go back and spend another 7 hours on the plane. Of course, when we are able, we do that, but there's a system we have been using. It's called teleconference. It's not television. It's just an online technology, and it's very cheap. It's very affordable. You can have this kind of face-to-face discussion, but you're not there physically. So these are just a few examples of how we work. I cannot even tell you what is a priority here. Everything's important. It's important to have meaningful texts. It's important to talk to the audience through teleconferences. And we publish, we update information available on our websites, we update our websites, we respond to questions. Everything is important. I can't single out anything, especially today, given the situation that our country is in. I would like to add another example. We have the account of young diplomats working at the Foreign Ministry of Russia. We have our own account. You can subscribe to this account, and please follow us. We publish news about our young diplomats, and I have a request. There is this person with the flag. Your question is next. Ms. Zaharova, I represent Chuvashia, and I have a question. This was the flag of Chuvashia, huh? Yes, my question is, you say there's a lot of conflicts. What is your secret for peace? Well, you should ask yourself, okay, you came from all the different parts of Russia, from all the different countries. Don't you think you can find common ground here? You're all different, you have different skin color, different traditions. Some of you like teas, others like coffee, some may prefer water, some drink alcohol, some don't drink, but still you can be together, you can be in this room together, you can ask questions. It's important that this experience that you got here in Sochi in Russia, you should take it back to people in your countries. You should tell them that you, being so young, so full of energy, if you can find common ground here today, what will stop you in the future? Nobody will we all of our countries, of course, we all can have our interests. We always will have our national interests, and we should protect our national interests, but at the same time, we should always respect each other's positions. We should always find common ground on the issues which are A, vital for our planet, and B, help our countries develop. So this experience, your experience today, you should extrapolate it to the rest of your lives. And when you become outstanding politicians, diplomats, maybe even leaders, national leaders, you should remember how you got together in Sochi in 2017 and you were able to find common ground even though you're all so different. Okay, to keep it balanced, I would like to ask representative of Tatarstan. And also, can we let ladies ask a few questions to keep it balanced? Ms. Zakharova, good afternoon. My name is Kirill. I represent Tatarstan. I'm a member of the Tatarstan delegation here at the festival. What are you doing is you're working hard 24/7 to defend Russia's position internationally. How do you know what I'm doing during the nighttime? Well, we get news from you 24/7. I really apologize. I just not. I have to say this. Recently we had this meeting with young people, with young guys, future diplomats, and there was this young guy who came up to me and asked me if I ever sleep. I said, "What do you mean?" Okay, guys, look, we're all normal people. We work this way. Our department works almost 24/7. We start early in the morning, we work late into the night, and it's not just one person, the one whose face you see all the time. There's a huge number of people. There's a huge team working together. For example, at the Foreign Ministry, there are people who monitor news, people who prepare comments, people who prepare responses to questions. There are people updating the website. There are translators. There are people who are in charge of accrediting foreign journalists. You shouldn't think that there's just one person doing all this job. That's a huge team. And not just those working in Moscow. We also have our embassies and consulates abroad. Of course, I'm very happy that you appreciate what we do, but please believe me when I say it's not just one person doing all this job. There's this huge team working together. Well, not that huge actually, but still, we work together as a team. Well, thank you. Thank you for what you just said, but to continue with your explanation, I have this question. What should we do locally? What should young people do in their cities, and what can we do in the digital world today? What kind of work are you talking about? Explaining our position, explaining the position of the Russian Federation. Okay. I think it is important to understand something here. Right, there are barriers, what I mentioned, barriers erected by media itself. There are countries where reports from Russia don't cross over. We say all sorts of things, we make information available, but then local television, local newspapers, local magazines, they just refuse. It's just like there's this blocking positive information about Russia from coming in. But there is the internet, there are social media, and there are no boundaries there, no borders there. And there are certain political forces, and they may erect the barriers even there. I hope that this will not happen. I think at least the internet can stand, remain free. I hope there will be no boundaries on the internet, even though there are boundaries for e-commerce. But still, like the example of the Crimea shows that there is such a thing as information blockade. Still, I hope that on a global scale, the internet will not become fragmented. So we always ask our regional journalists, well, we talk to NGOs, to young people, to press offices of government institutions. You should tell people about what is happening, important events that take place in your provinces, in your regions, in your cities. And you should not do this in Russian alone. You should also do this in other languages. We will help you. We will help you work on those posts, and we will help you to organize events. Sometimes I do briefings in other places, like there was a briefing in Vladivostok recently. There were 2 briefings in the Crimea. So please invite us. I would be more than happy to come to Tatarstan and have a briefing there. There was a briefing in St. Petersburg. So yes, consider it done. We'll come to Tatarstan.
I don't hear you. Please take the mic. I'm Khamieva Gulnara from Bashkortostan. Here's my question. So we talk a lot about digital age, digital identity. So how is this digitalization going to influence fake news? You mean digital space, the internet, or do you mean like digital TV, or I mean everything digital, really? Because we, for young people now working in today's conditions, well, you mentioned blacklists today, blacklists of journalists. So if it's just a robot copy-pasting fake news, what do we do with that? Well, here's my advice to you. I could give the same advice to foreigners, but to you, first and foremost, please watch or re-watch a very famous Russian film about Moscow. It had some very interesting things to say on television. The forecast, it's a movie from the late 80s, so the forecast was that TV would be the only thing in the future. No theaters, no movies, no nothing, just TV. So right now we are recalling those ideas that we would have nothing but TV. And now we're talking about a crisis in television, when the audience doesn't watch TV anymore. They consume digital news. They watch videos online, or just other types of digital information. This is a continuous process. New technologies will find their consumers. There will be modernization, change, transformation. I don't think there's going to be only one type of mass media, of communication. There will be something new. It's like newspapers. On the one hand, at some point, we had a crisis when it came to printed media. But on the other hand, the same newspapers went digital, and now they're online, and they're doing just fine. So for some people, though, it's still important to get a newspaper in the morning, open it, read it. Yes, there are such people, but it's a part of the population. They make this decision, even though they can work modern gadgets just fine. So transformation will be happening continuously. There will be competition, of course, but at the same time you need to follow the current events, the new advances. This idea that, okay, we're going to succeed just putting up posters, if we want to be competitive, we need to understand the trends and go with the trends. I'd like to add a little about the future of news media. I agree with Ms. Zakharova, but we will also see the ascension of big data, so-called big data. This will be a more difficult time. We'll need to find a way to deal with that. Another interesting example. Over the last few years, there's been a demand for combining different types of media. For example, turn on the TV and you'll see the news from social media at the bottom of the screen. So the online audience feeds television and vice versa. One type of communication within one company, one media outlet can have different types of audiences. You with the Serbian flag, please, if I'm not mistaken. Hi, my name is Joanna, and I'm.
Thank you for this such an honor. It is such an honor to listen you and be with the whole world in front of you. Also, it is a great opportunity to explain. A lot of you probably doesn't know how much and how big is cultural heritage of Kosovo and Metohija and what it represents to us. Probably because media don't show you the beautiful part of that area of our country that we really love, and it's actually sacred for us. So it was a comment and now a question, which is connected with my comment, is how can digital diplomacy help us to present cultural heritage, which in my opinion, maybe as a student of architecture, can change a picture of Kosovo and why we don't give up on that part of our land. Also, how can you help us to present to present that to the world? Because it's a big problem because of fake news and fake reports in the media. Thank you again.
Спасибо вам большое. Я просто хотела сказать, что...
Thank you very much. When Kosovo declared independence, that very minute, the West supported it, the US, the EU. At that time, there was a very aggressive campaign launched in Western media. I saw that. It's not that I read about it in some reports. I saw it. I went abroad as part of delegations. It was my job. I turned on the TV and saw this campaign, these ads. I will remember it forever. There was this English phrase, Kosovo is a country of amazing opportunities. So country is the key word. It happened right away after, in violation of international norms, the UN Security Council resolution, statements from the government in Belgrade, the will of the people, Kosovo declared independence and was recognized as a sovereign state. So look at the map, read about Kosovo. What do you think? The sovereign state, could it have afforded to run an ad in prime time on Western TV channels? So someone paid for it. Someone programmed international audiences that Kosovo was a country, sovereign country that has amazing opportunities, offers it. So those opportunities, a lot was written about them by Carla Del Ponto. Many years have passed, and we can see now what kind of so-called opportunities this state actually has. This campaign failed. It brought a lot of trouble. So why am I saying this now? Now everyone is saying that Russia is a potential aggressor. In every program you can hear that. The same was happening when they spoke about Kosovo and the opportunities it offers. It should have been done differently. Yes, we offer wonderful opportunities for investment, for development, for cooperation, based on a legal framework. So, why so many efforts are exerted to launch these disinformation campaigns about Russia and Serbia? So there are political forces who aim to create this negative image. Once I went to this conference in Vienna, and I heard Italian journalists with their report. It was a couple of years ago. So I asked them, you're European journalists, why do you think there's such an aggressive campaign against Russia? Well, when mainstream starts chewing on other countries, we're not alone in that, of course. And they told me, this is not politics only. Can you imagine what kind of investment opportunities there are in Russia? Human resources, technology, science, scale. Huge potential. Huge potential for investment, money, for making money. So this is your typical competition to prevent investors from coming to Russia. So I'm giving you an example, because Kosovo as the land of amazing opportunities is fake. It's a fake. It's not advertisement, not commercial, not the commercial kind. Politicians doing propaganda are behind it. They're working against a different country, in that case, against Serbia. At that time, no one heard what Serbia was saying. And thanks to Russian position in the UN Security Council, Mr. Churkin, legendary diplomat. So you're asking how Serbia could broadcast this position. Well, thanks to those people, thanks to us, Serbia's position was broadcast, because otherwise it would have been all about Kosovo and the opportunities it offered. So how do we build cooperation and interaction with Serbia in terms of information? I'll tell you a secret. I promised Dacic to come to Serbia. This is Serbia's foreign minister. Yes. Probably this will be next year, early next year. Serbia celebrates New Year's Day. It'll be very interesting. So I think we'll meet and talk about this as well. Friends, well, there's another question. Okay, just one more question. Just 2, 3. I see Chinese flag. Hello, Roxana Soybatalova. I'm studying in China. I'm getting my master's degree. I represent Chinese delegation here. I'd like to ask for your advice. As representatives of active youth here in Russia, in China, how can we help the government to stop the influx of fakes? How do we facilitate shaping the right image of Russia in the eyes of the West and the world? This is a very complex issue. I can tell you some more about social media, about writing articles, about learning different languages. Since you're studying in China, you probably know Chinese quite well. You can give speeches there. Well, those are all very general global things, but personally I think that when you come abroad, and I'm talking now to our young people, to Russian young people, just you being there and behaving the way you behave shapes the image of Russia. It's not on global level, it's not official, but the way you are perceived abroad is the way they perceive Russia as well. You come as a person, as your own person, but how often do you get asked, where are you from? For people of that country, you're not just some Masha or Nikolai. You are Russia. So the way you talk to these people, what you say to them, that's how they're going to see our country. Well, there are more general responses to your question, but here's a more practical kind of advice. So, through yourself, through your life, through your communication, interaction with foreigners, how you behave when you go on vacation, what kind of ties you build, this is how these people will see Russia. That's the truth. Hello. If you want people to notice you, make a poster. Hi, Ms. Zakharova. I'm an editor of a local internet portal. So since I work in this area, let's continue with the subject of fakes. There's this thing, memes. You take a picture and you have some headline, and like a virus, through shares, it circulates and it's disseminated very quickly among young people. This type of fake news is very hard to counteract because there's nothing behind it. When you have an article or a video, you can maybe appeal to the source or something, but with a meme, no, nothing like that. It disseminates very quickly and very widely. So speaking about fighting fake news, are there any techniques maybe or organizations of young people that could counteract the fakes that have nothing behind them? You're absolutely right. Why is this a problem? Because you oversimplify everything. It's a combination of a picture that's very easy to understand and 2-3 phrases that hit bullseye. And here you have an image. Some people think all memes are very funny, but that's not true. If there are information workers here, well, go online, read how this term came to be. It appeared in France. This is just for you. But it combines visual perception and your understanding just think about how fast you go through your news feed. You take a look at the picture, you enlarge it or not, and this gets built into your subconsciousness. It works like a trap of a kind. The person doesn't even realize that he paid any attention to this at all, but they did, he or she did. So what do? We need to learn about this technology, this technique. I believe that we should solve problems not through fighting them, but through building up our immune system. You can take different kinds of drugs, but you can just help strengthen your immune system. Of course, if you need medication, you should take it. Maybe you'll share this picture or repost it, but add a comment. Or maybe you'll create a web page to fight fake news, bring attention to them. Maybe you'll become a blogger and you'll tell people about who does that, what company funded these memes and campaigns. But I believe that we need to come up with more counter-arguments. It's not only about politics, maybe PR, economy. When you produce your own content that's more eye-catching, of course, it should be within the legal framework, but combining surgical intervention and just everyday exercise would be most effective.
I can stay here until tomorrow. My name is Grigory. I'm from the State of Israel. First of all, thank you. We want to thank Russia for the warm welcome. I was born in Russia. I haven't been to Sochi for 25 years. And it looks very nice today. We speak Russian in Israel, so we don't need interpreters to help us. I have a question for you. We've been watching the situation in Syria. We read Russian language media. We see what Russia does to fight terrorism, global terrorism. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about the end game in Syria? Considering the situation there with all the parties, all the regional parties involved. You know what? This is not a computer game where you can have the start button and you can scroll down to the moment where it says game over. It's not a computer game. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for this country, for this entire region. And thankfully, this country has a chance now that this may soon be over, that we see certain signs of improvement these days. I hope you've been watching what the Defense Ministry, they release information almost online, facts and predictions, so you should take a look at those things. But like I said, this work, Syrian settlement, there are several tracks. First and foremost, there's the matter of fighting terrorists directly, not in virtual reality, not by making statements. This job is being done specifically by our servicemen who go on combat missions like heroes. Every day there will be books written, films will be made about them, about what they are doing there valiantly to fight this terrorist threat, stop it from spreading further. Then there is the political track. You know, when they told us it would be impossible to gather the opposition and make them sit at the same table with the official government, they said nobody can do this, not just Russia. They said the opposition will never talk to the government. they would stop all those things, block them from happening. And look at what is happening in Astana to this day. It started with Geneva. There was the political opposition. What kind of talks did they have in Geneva? It was indirect talks through the UN. And they told us, look at what is happening in Geneva. This is another indication that they will never be able to find common ground. And then the Astana process started, and Russia played an important role there. It was no longer indirect. It was a direct dialogue between whom? Between the government and the people who fought the government. Just recently, people they described as rebels, armed opposition. You can't even imagine. I have another question. Oh, let me finish. You can't even imagine. You can't even imagine the kind of resistance we meet. People try to torpedo the Astana process and what is happening in Geneva. The Geneva talks. They use all sorts of ways, pressure. They use benefits. They offer benefits to people to somehow stop all those processes from converging together. So I don't have a specific date. We are not giving predictions here. We're doing specific work. And there's the third track. We have many tracks. The third track is the humanitarian dimension. We provide humanitarian aid. We help rebuilding infrastructure. Week after week, we tell what Russia and other countries are doing there in Syria. Of course, the International Committee of the Red Cross. I don't know if we have here in this room, Evgeny Primakov, there is this person, he was supposed to be here. He organized the Russian NGO involved directly in supplying humanitarian aid to Syria. Again, you have several tracks working together here, and we encourage all the other countries who cared so much, quote unquote, about the future of Syria. We urge them to show their support today, to provide humanitarian aid, to provide funds, to organize a real donor conference, and not to support the so-called opposition, which is actually groups of militants. Help Syrian civilians directly. So there are many tracks, and we work on all those tracks. Well, to continue with the subject, there was a Center for Coordinating Efforts in Syria. What can you say about this? It's a question for the Defense Ministry. It's not my place to talk about this. Of course, I can say a lot of things, but I would ask you to talk to our military experts directly. We have a comment from a delegate from Syria. Sure.
Firas Darwish from Syrian Embassy in Moscow. I don't know this guy, which country does he come from, because we don't recognize Israel. He was talking about, yes, he was talking about the Syrian crisis. When does it end? So just I want to remind him that his officials in this entity in the south of Syria received a lot of terrorists in Israel, and they provided them with humanitarian aids in their hospitals. So how can he ask about the ending the crisis in? Yes. So they.
You know what? Let me say something. He's here as a person. He doesn't represent. You are present here as an individual. You don't represent the country. You are not presenting the official position of your country. You speak as a person, as an expert. So I would ask you to speak respectfully about the position of other delegates. This is not an official delegation.
To explain what happened in Syria. You know what happened in Syria the first time. The other countries received terrorists and provided them with weapons. Israel received these terrorists in the hospitals, and they attacked Syria many times by air force, by their planes. So, how can they ask about the ending the crisis in Syria at the same time they are attacking Syria? So, that's it. So they are supporting terrorists in Syria.
Ваш вопрос. Ваш вопрос, как люди...
Talking about the youth forum, we are not talking about the political issues.
I get it. Okay, let me answer your question. Your question was how people can ask this kind of question. Well, that's why we are gathered here. That's the purpose of this gathering. That's why we are here. That's number one. Number two, what we are talking about today is how information does not reach people. So this is the answer to your question. There are people who are not aware of the fundamental reasons behind the Syrian crisis. This is precisely what we've been talking about here. Information gets distorted. And one more request for... We can't hear you if you don't use the mic. Yeah, I get it. Okay, can we let this lady with the scarf ask a question? My name is Amal Zaki. I'm from Egypt. I have a question for you. I would like to ask about your position on relations between Russia and Egypt. Do you think that it's at the optimum level, or is it possible to take this relations to a whole new level? First of all, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting us to come here and taking a look at Russia, how Russia develops. It develops greatly. And we would like to invite you to visit Egypt. And we invite everybody here in this room to attend our youth festival, which will take place next year. We want all of you to see. We want all of you to see that Egypt is a peaceful country. We don't have any terrorists. And please come yourself and see for yourself, like you said, right? And we want to improve our relations. We want our relationship develop. And we don't get it. Where are your tourists? Why are they not in Egypt yet? This is another lie that circulated by the media. They claim that we have terrorists. Let me tell you, our country, our military is very strong. They keep things under control. And we would be happy to see you in Egypt. Okay, this was a question about tourists in Sochi. You should remember where you're asking this question, But seriously, though, when we talk about tourism, this security issues, our two countries, I guess talks are underway, and this has been going on for quite some time now. And there are serious reasons for having this dialogue, and we have commented on this issue more than once. And as far as our bilateral relations are concerned, of course, we still have room for improvement. We can develop our relations further. And then, as far as your invitation is concerned, thank you very much. And as soon as we have this opportunity, we'll visit Egypt again. This is a country with a lot of history and with great future. Thank you very much. Colleagues, friends, I know that you have millions of questions for Ms. Zahara, but there is this person with the bottle. So let's take one more question.
Because your country have a lot of water. My country don't have clean water. Thank you. I have a message for this water. Please keep clean water in the world. I think, ne dai Bog, na Russia. If will be next World War, it will be for the water. Please keep clean that one. And my question, I come from Afghanistan. Maybe a lot of you know Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, a lot of the media and the people, They think Russian Federation support Taliban, but you know Taliban is one of the so dangerous terrorist group in the world. What is your opinion? It is right or not? And second, we are the main part of the terrorism area because your country, for example, your country and the biggest country, United States, Russian Federation or other country, they're fighting with terrorism in my country. And some group of the world, they supporting terrorism in my country. You are talking about fighting with the terrorism, but some group of, I know you know about this group also. This group is continue to support the terrorism. In your opinion, when we can stop support the terrorism? Because terrorism is enemy of the all human. It is not the enemy of our country, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. If today will be terrorism in Afghanistan, we didn't support our country, our people, our army, tomorrow will be in your country. Please say no to terrorism and extremism. Thank you very much.
What is the day today? It's 17th of October, and yesterday it was 16th, right? The genuine news. Okay. So yesterday on September 16th. All your questions, they come in very handy. On October 16th at 8:26 p.m. on the website of the Foreign Ministry, there was this comment. Let me read it to you. On British Times reporting fake news on Russian policies in Afghanistan. That's the front page of our website. And point after point, we reiterate our position that this is another fake article about Russia supporting the Taliban and supporting terrorists in Afghanistan. So here's this piece. I guess you can't see it here on my phone. There's this screenshot of this article, and we put this stamp fake. These are all fakes, and we keep talking about that. Go to our website. This information is available in English and in other languages, including Russian. They keep saying those things time after time after time. Who received terrorists officially? Please tell me, which country received terrorists? On an official level, there were photographs published. You know very well that Russia has never supported terrorist organizations. Remember what happened with Osama bin Laden. Where did he come from? Where was he educated? Who supported him in the early years of his life? Who stuffed him with all those ideas and concepts? Who were his patrons? Go online, and this is a very enlightening story. Find this article. I think it was in a Central American newspaper in the 1970s. On the front page of the newspaper, they had this photograph of young Osama bin Laden, and it said, this is the Afghan warrior helping to build a democracy, freedom, and so on and so forth. This is just an example of fake news. And, this piece of news is so old, it should have a beard as long as Osama bin Laden's. And you know what happened afterwards, the kind of tragedy that resulted from this for the United States, for Afghanistan, for this entire region. Now, let me say something about terrorism. This happened yesterday. This is just another example of misinformation being used This time it was in the British media, and we caught that. But there are examples like that. On Russian policies in Afghanistan, we keep catching those fake news. But this is not just something that journalists say. Official representatives of the U.S. State Department say that Russia supports the Taliban, and they even claim sometimes that we supply them with weapons. What's that? That's an outright lie. So, like I said, week after week on Afghanistan, month after month, we catch those fake news and we repudiate those things. As for, could you please leave your card for a second, because I want to see this person's face. You represent Afghanistan, and you don't have to tell us what terrorism is. We know about terrorism firsthand. I'm not sure any other country had such brutal, unhuman, uncivilized. This comes straight from hell. Such brutal terrorist attacks like the one in Beslan. This was terrible. It was a terrible tragedy. If you don't believe me, you should watch those videos. You should read about the tragedy in Beslan and what happened afterwards. Did we enjoy this kind of international support? All those NGOs who fight for human rights, all those NGOs who keep talking about fighting terrorism all the time. Where were all those organizations back then? Whom did they blame for Beslan, for the Beslan tragedy? They said it was all because of Russia's bad policies. And Russia kept saying you can't talk to terrorists, you can't negotiate with terrorists, you should destroy them. You can't have any bargains with terrorists. And all those terrorists, those bastards, I apologize for using the term, they were received in Europe, in Britain, and all local elites like to spend time. They were treated like celebrities, like some prominent figures. Those guys with their hands covered with blood. And they were even received at the Department of State. They were engaged in official talks with the US government, and they had the blood of children on their hands. So once again, let me tell you something. All sorts of things can happen, but what happened in Beslan, this came straight from hell. So please don't tell us, don't lecture us about terrorism. And when this whole situation started with the so-called Arab Spring, democratizing this entire region, supporting all those weird political movements, and arming all those political movements, supplying them with weapons, supplying them with hardware. When this just started, we saw that when we saw the first signs of what was about to happen in Syria, straight away we said, this has nothing to do with democratization. This has nothing to do with the Arab Spring, as some would like us to believe. We said this was once again future tragedy, future crime against civilians, against common people, ordinary people. And when we talk about human rights, we should always remember this only is important as long as the person lives. It's important to fight for human rights when people are alive. And if there is a threat to the life of a person, you have to care about preserving this life first and foremost. People should, the country itself should be able to sort out their problems on their own. You should not supply weapons from across the border. You should not support all those terrorists, all those terrorist bastards. And when this happened, when the crisis in Syria began to evolve and this was now on a global scale. You remember what we said in the United Nations? Well, we said, like we were united in the 1940s, we should unite today, but not against fascism. We should be united against a similar evil, international terrorism. Today, nobody supported us. back then. And then Russia had to act on its own. We had to send our air force to Syria to put things in order in Syria and save the world from international terrorism. But the offer is still on the table. The world has seen that fighting terrorism in a real practical way, this fight can be effective. And many countries are suffering from terrorism today. What happened in Nice? I don't know about your country's literature, but in our classical literature in Russia, all those places, cities like Nice, in Russian classical literature, Nice has always been a wealthy city, a calm city, a respectable city. And look what is happening in those countries, in those cities today. The cities that people used to think of as safe havens. Now, you don't have any safe islands in the world where you can hide yourself. And now, if countries come together, form military alliances, terrorists can acquire new forms, and no army, no military alliance can't do anything with that. You can just take a truck and drive it into a crowd of people, and you will kill a lot more people than if you plan some kind of invasion or something. This is obvious now, so we have to learn our lessons. And our country, the Russian Federation, we found a way out. We offered a way to deal with this situation, and we invited everybody to cooperate. I think it's a real crime that many Western countries, not everybody, but certain Western countries, stopped working with Russia in fighting terrorism. They suspended their counter-terrorist cooperation with Russia. This is what the United States did at a certain stage. This is what the United Kingdom did at a certain stage. And as terrorists unite, surprisingly, the leading countries of the world, they're no longer united. They stop sharing data. I can talk about this for hours and hours. I really apologize for being so emotional. Let's take 2 more questions.
Last 2 questions, please. We're really out of time. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Good evening, everyone. Ms. Zakharova. I'd like to thank the first forum of young diplomats in the Council that gave us the opportunity to come here with leading officials from foreign ministers, wonderful people, delegations from different countries. I'm called Sami. I work in the Sudan consulate in Moscow. I agree with everything you said, Ms. Zakharova. Recently, I read an article by an expert. He said that fake news kill people's minds. Fake news influences people in a very bad way because they believe what they read in newspapers, what they see. They think these are facts. And based on this, they operate. In Sudan, we suffered a lot from this. And there are still a lot of people who believe there's instability there, this is wrong. As a consulate official, many people come up to me and tell me they want to go to Sudan, see some tourist attractions. But the first question they ask is whether there's stability and security there. And I say, yes, it's very secure. But they say, we read this in a newspaper or online that the situation is not stable, there's war. Of course, this is the result of fake news. And I remember this incident once. We had an event in Moscow, and a girl from a European country came over. We cooperated with this organization. We ordered a taxi. And she said, no, I'm not going to go by taxi. And she said, no, it's not, there's no security here. It's not safe. Please send a car for me from the embassy. So we need to fight fake news. We need to have some mechanisms to cooperate, to come to a consensus, maybe have an agreement, have some mechanisms to counteract this. Thank you. Do I understand correctly that this is the Ukrainian flag over there? Yes, please, your question. Well, this was a secret tactic, but my question is connected to this flag. My question is this. Let's go back a little. After some news come new news and everyone forgets. So when it came to MH17, we proved that it was not our fault. But there is no new information forthcoming about this. No one talks about this anymore. And second question. Well, young people gathered here, but I don't think there are any Ukrainians here, even though we're closely connected. And now we have this abyss separating us. So how can we bridge this gap, or are we past the point of no return? And there's only abyss ahead of us. Well, you're wrong in saying that there are no Ukrainians here, but there is truth in it as well. I saw yesterday on a panel a few people who were standing holding posters, the Donetsk People's Republic flag and stuff. According to the Minsk agreements, who were signed by representatives from Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics and the Ukrainian president, they will have to live side by side. But of course, when they signed it, they thought that the agreements would be implemented. And you can see what they're doing now in Kiev. They're just mocking them. Well, the agreements are written on paper, so, you know. But as more and more days go by without these agreements being implemented, every day there is more antagonism. It's growing. We had this process to ensure there's a chance for reconciliation. A lot of things that's happened between Russia and Ukraine were aimed at giving Ukraine a chance to reconcile. That's why we went with the Minsk agreements and other things, but every day what we see happening in the Supreme Rada, what we hear from the Kiev establishment, they just drive a wedge between the Ukrainian people who have suffered enough. They have different views. Let's not oversimplify. They have different perspectives on how Ukraine should develop in the future, but they're trying to make it look as if there's only just one opinion, and it belongs to the people in power in Kiev. But that's not true. But they don't want to listen to the people. As for whether there is a chance, whether we have any options, well, of course we do. Let's not project everything in the Kiev regime. Let's not look at what's happening in the Rada and think that this is exactly what all Ukrainians believe. Some of them do, but some of them believe differently. So if in Kiev they are committed to the part of the Minsk agreements that says that Donbass is part of Ukraine, they need to realize that the people living in Donbass think differently. But they have no representatives in the government now. So while we have Minsk agreements and the entire world recognize that there is no alternative to them, of course we have options. But you see a great part of the political establishment, even though I don't think you can say, they can use this word establishment when talking about the Kiev regime. They do everything to put up a barrier between Russia and Ukraine and to separate Donbass from Ukraine. Ukrainian politicians are the ones doing that. There's nothing more terrible than adopting this law and using Russian language. We didn't come up with this in Russia or some imaginary enemies of Ukraine. They were the ones doing that. So what kind of message are they sending with this to Donbass, even though they believe these are citizens of their country? Is this law supposed to unite the Ukrainian society? No, of course not. It's driving another wedge. It's driving a stake through the bleeding heart of Ukraine. So, I think, and it's not only my opinion, Foreign Ministry stated this on a number of occasions, that we have different options. Many people understand that, of course, we are neighbors, there are families. My ancestors, some of them have Ukrainian last names. It's not just, these are not empty words. It's part of our culture. And I'm not alone. There are many people like that. Some people have relatives in Ukraine, or their relatives came from Ukraine. So this community, this connection, you can't destroy it, even though many people try.
What was your second question? Oh, about MH17. Now, investigation is being conducted in a secret way. It's not transparent. Even Malaysia, for a long time, was not invited to participate in this investigation. Let me remind you, there was a resolution adopted by the UN Security Council, and this is not being done. A proper investigation is not being conducted. This is done totally opaquely. And you are totally right that they keep this hushed, and initially there were some leaks, and then the media forgot all about it because Russia raised a number of questions, for example, on sharing information, and countries have this information. You know how much radars and other equipment countries have in Ukraine and around it, and all those leading Western countries. They have lots of data, but they refuse to share this data. So you're totally right about that. And all Russia could do, we've shared this information. We had dozens of experiments. Remember, there was this press conference by Russian experts about this. We did this openly. We talked to the media about this, and we pointed out that even the debris scattered around at the site, nobody tried to pick it. And we encouraged all those countries involved in the investigation. We told them, you should collect the debris. And, what they said? They said, we got everything we needed. Can you imagine that? It sounds ridiculous. We all know, even when you have a car accident, just two cars collide, there's a dent, they collect all the evidence that's there. And this tragedy happened. Every piece of the fuselage of debris is valuable, but it was all scattered there. And I think they were Dutch reporters. They did a special investigation, and they would get detained, and then they were accused of doing something unlawful. So they want to keep it hush-hush, keep it opaque. And it's been a while. Like I said, there is this UN Security Council resolution that is binding. It says that there should be a proper investigation, but whatever it is they're doing, the so-called investigation, it's done separately from this resolution. I have another question. I'm very happy to be here. And maybe this will be the final question. Sure, fine with me. And there was a question about climate. I just came back from Simferopol. I talked about climate for 5 years. You should go to Simferopol. They will tell you everything about climate. Okay, my question is, I am very happy to be here at the festival on solidarity and fighting imperialism. So my question to you is, we all say that Western journalists, they create this false impressions, but we are all Russian people. We all watched Channel 1. You know this guy Kisilov. And what they do is they also create this kind of propaganda images. They say all French are fools, they know nothing. They say that Merkel is a woman who is not sexually satisfied. So let's be honest, there are 2 or 3 governments, all the governments fighting each other. So let's remember that every government has its own axe to grind, its own interests. And when we went to Ukraine, there was this issue of gas transmission to Europe. We want the situation there to be stable. That's why we invaded. That's why we sent our troops to Ukraine. This is what the United States do when they have to take care of their economic interests. They fight for interests. But we are common people here. We are ordinary people. What the government does, it serves oligarchs. We send our troops to Donbass, and then people there, they want to have their own state. But we gave them no guarantees because we like to keep it this way. Our capitalists went there. I talked to people living there. This is just the world capitalist system, and the world will always be torn apart with wars. Okay, I have a question. Let me ask a question. Okay, let's listen to all sorts of things we like and things we don't like. Everybody should be able to say something, say what they think, and I will get my chance to respond to that. So let's listen to everybody, even if we don't like certain things that some people might say. I will respond, and then you may want to. Okay, this is my personal position, and I apologize if it sounds offensive to some of you. Okay, my question is, don't you think that as long as governments serve the interests of major oligarchy groups, there will never be peace in the world? A war will always be there, as long as they pursue their goals. That's my question. Okay, let's take it point by point. First of all, Kiselyov does not work for Channel One. You need to know your facts. Since you say that he is such a tough propagandist, you should at least remember he doesn't work for Channel One. That's number one. Now, number two, do you really think, like you said, that Russia sent its troops to Donbass? Do you actually think that if Russia sent troops to Donbass, there would be anything for us to discuss here? Okay, the subject of this session is fake news. Fake news. I know that this is your opinion and you're entitled to have your opinion, but you really shouldn't manipulate things like that. I can't believe that you're not aware. When you say that Russia sent troops to Donbass, do you really think that we send hundreds of tanks and we use humanitarian convoys to send our armor? Okay, the border between Russia and Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, there is no real border there. We had a lot of volunteers who went there from the Communist Party. Yeah, everybody knows that. That's a well-known fact, that the border there is porous. And you may think that this is a revelation, some kind of revelation, but let me tell you that the mechanism to rebuild control over this border, it's all written down in a very secret document. It's called the Minsk Agreements. It's a very secret document. It's available, easily available, but many people don't read it. Many people talk like that, and they don't really care. They can't find time to read this document. But then there's an even more secret document. You go to the UN website, and there is a document that says that control over the border by Ukraine should be re-established. But the problem is not with that. The problem is that there are actual people living there. They live there, and they're just like you and me. And they have every right to live there. It was Kyiv who sent tanks to eastern Ukraine to suppress those people there. That's a fact, hard, cold fact. And the problem is when there was this anti-constitutional coup in Kyiv, again, this is a hard, cold fact, there was a legitimate president, and then twice he was removed. The first time when they had the first Maidan revolution, and the second time when they had this second time, and then they ousted him. Do you understand what this was? I think you just don't understand it. They were certain people who realized that no matter what they do, no matter whom they elect, whom they vote for, in any case, the same story will continue. The same thing will happen again and again. Whatever they do legitimately, this will always end with an anti-constitutional coup sponsored by certain parties from certain quarters. So when there was this anti-constitutional coup supported from abroad, because they were intelligence officers working there, they occupied whole floors in administrative buildings in Ukraine. This is another hard, cold fact. Tanks flying over the border, nobody saw that. There is no evidence except for some rumors and gossips. Those things that the leaders, the top diplomats were present in the Ukrainian capital, that they send money to those groups. This has been proven like 100 times. Remember those snipers on Maidan Square? What about this investigation? What happened? It resulted in nothing. They forgot all about it. The reason I bring up snipers is because people who did not agree with that, people who rejected this idea, who rejected this anti-constitutional coup, and this is the second time we see this. People vote for a certain president and then he gets toppled. They said, we refuse to accept this. We do not agree. Our regions don't agree with that. Then tanks were sent against those people. That's the root cause of this crisis. This is where it all came from. And when they sent tanks against those people, they told the international community that there are terrorists living in southeast Ukraine, all those Donetsk terrorists, those bad guys. These are peaceful people, hard workers. They have been feeding the rest of Ukraine. And they call them terrorists, people who worked in mines their whole life. And there was just this one time in this, they never went to Maidan, they never went anywhere. There's just this one time when they said, we don't agree to this anti-constitutional coup, and tanks were sent against those people immediately. And when the Minsk agreements were put on paper, everybody signed it, and including Russia, we said that Ukraine will control the border, but only after those people get their right to live there in Ukraine guaranteed. That's what happened. And just for the sake of those people to be able to live there, to have the same rights as people living in other parts of Ukraine, that's why there is this special mechanism for re-establishing control over the border, not vice versa. First of all, let's close the border, and then later on, they will start living there. But probably not in this life, though. And then you said, we send our troops to Syria. We send our troops to Syria. Do you remember what actually happened? So what do you think? Okay, let's listen to this guy. Here we have somebody from Syria. What did actually happen? Did we send our troops to Syria? Did we invade Syria? Right, exactly. This is the way to do things. It's not many countries who... No. Let's get our ducks in a row. Russia. I received an official request from the legitimate government of a country. They asked us to help them fighting terrorism. And everybody else, what they are doing there, that's a big question. How they ended up in Syria. So this is a clear picture of how fake news, the effect they have on weak minds. And you also mentioned something about fighting imperialism. Well, I'm no expert on that. You should discuss this among yourselves. Personally, I think I should do my job, and I should be doing what I'm doing. Now, you said something about going to Syria. Well, we got that straight. You said we did this in the interest of our oil companies, in the interest of big business. Okay, listen. When people on the metro, on the plane, at our resorts, when they get blown up, we're not talking about oil companies. We're not talking about big corporations. We're talking about your interests. No matter what country you come from, no matter what kind of passport you have. You may have a Bulgarian passport and you find yourself in the United Kingdom, and then you get killed there by terrorists. So this is why we did that. I heard all those stories when there was aggression in Iraq. I remember I spent a couple of years, this was just soon after I joined the foreign ministry, a couple of years later on, but I was working for a department where we monitored the media, and I would read about these things every day. And many of our political commentators would say that we should join this coalition of sorts. This is a historic chance because we're losing oil contracts in Iraq. And it's not in Russia's interest not to join the anti-Iraqi campaign. We should join it, or we should greenlight the resolution, or at least to join this operation in Iraq. And if we do that, we'll have this windfall revenues, petrodollars, all the oil contracts in the world. So who was right eventually? Who? Yes, of course, a certain part of the elite that was behind this anti-Iraqi campaign, they got rich. But you know what? To me, as a person, not as a spokesperson of the foreign ministry, from this point on, I saw our country's history in a totally different light. I realized that what we are doing is a very balanced long-term position. We don't support unlawful things. We observe international law. Yes, we are aware of our interests, we are aware of potential losses, but we never participate in such takeovers of other countries. And you should also read about that. Of course, there are multinational corporations with their interests. It's a fact. But let me remind you of something. And I don't want to go into arguments between the followers of different economic theories, but let me remind you something. Those corporations, one of the things they do, they create jobs. So big business, what they do is they create jobs, among other things. But what happens in Syria? This was no longer a matter of big corporations and their interests. It was a question of surviving, the world surviving with the ISIS threatened the whole world. This may be the first time. Maybe there were some examples in history. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know history that well. But I think this was the first time when the world confronted this phenomenon, this kind of union of terrorist groups setting up a quasi-state, not just pursuing short-term or even long-term goals, like blackmail, murder, assassinations, and then reaping some benefits. No, they were able to set up a state of their own. And they covered several countries, several regions. They were affected. And you're talking about the big business, you're talking about corporations. There were no corporations there in this terrorist state. This is a totally new kind of evil that the world faced. ISIS. And when it became obvious that unless Russia does something, unless we do something immediately, this will spread exponentially. That's when we had to take action. And the things you mentioned about big business and economic interests, you have this platform to discuss these things. All right. This is it. Thank you very much, Ms. Zakharova. I would like to thank all the organizers, Gimo and the Dialogue of Civilizations. Thank you. This was extremely interesting.